All right, so I'm going to open us up in a prayer, and I'll do a quick introduction of Dr. Joel, and then we'll turn it over to him. So if you guys would all join me, in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Come, Holy Spirit, come, Lord Jesus. Dear Lord, we thank you so much for this day. We thank you for bringing us all here together. We thank you for the gift of allowing Dr. Joel to come speak to us on this important topic as we all continue to fight for life here in the state of Florida. We continue to pray to you in thanksgiving for defeating Amendment 4 back at the previous election. We ask that you give us the strength going forward, that we may continue this fight, that we may continue to change the hearts and the minds of all those in Florida, and then in doing so, that may change the very culture of the United States to be ever more in line with your will and your desire to love each and every one of us. We ask this all in your most holy name. Amen. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. All right, as some of you guys may know, because Dr. Joel came and he was on a panel of psychologists who presented to the Catholic Campus Ministry Group. He is a Catholic psychologist here at UNF, and would you be able to give a quick kind of like background about what your studies were in and the research that you did that kind of led you into this particular field? And then feel free to start after the words.
Sure, yeah. Man, mine's a long story. I actually did my undergrad at Franciscan University in television and radio communications. And then never worked in the field. Was hired by an international company, and a large part of my job for that international company was hiring people to come work for them. And in that role, I kind of walked alongside people as their careers developed, which then led to closer relationships and their opening up about struggles in their personal life. And I think that was really the beginning of the seed that God planted for me being curious about skills and ways that I could help people on a deeper level. So I went back to school. I went to Divine Mercy University, which in my opinion is the best. It's also the only staunchly Catholic doctoral program for Catholic integration in the field of psychology. So it integrates, we study Catholic theology, philosophy, and Catholic psychology. So a pursuit of the psychological sciences through theology and philosophy, which we'll talk a little bit about here. I ended up doing an internship at the Notre Dame of Maryland University, across the street from Loyola in North Baltimore, and that's where I first started working with college students. I'd worked with adolescents and older adults, and I really just fell in love with working with people who are at kind of a crossroads in their life and really exploring identity, who they are, what they feel like they're being called to do, and that's what brought me to UNF. So just to clarify, I don't teach. This is very different for me. This is usually not what I do, stand up and talk in front of people. So bear with me. I am a clinical psychologist. So that means that I treat people for psychological concerns. I provide assessments to get greater understanding of people's concerns and personality traits, and then provide treatment and recommendations for individuals and also groups. So that's me in a nutshell. I don't know, like you all are part of a pro-life group, and I'll be honest, like I don't know how much new information I'm going to introduce to you all today, but my hope is that this is more of a conversation and less of me trying to lecture. So if you have questions, please ask them. Don't worry about interrupting. I do have sections in the presentation for both reactions and questions, but if something comes up for you, please don't hesitate to just ask. Cool? All right, so I entitled this a brief overview. My hope is to define some things for you and also give you insight into where the professional field of psychology exists today in 2025. I'm going to give you a little bit of a historical overview of the American Psychological Association's relationship with psychology, provide you with results of research, mostly very recent research, because I think that's the research that matters as you all evangelize and educate yourselves about abortion and the effects of it. And then also provide you all with some resources and talk a little bit about what you can do as individuals who aren't psychologists, who might have interactions with people who are either considering abortion or have had an abortion themselves. How do you help them? Cool. So, very basic, just some simple definitions. What is psychology? It's the scientific study of the mind and behavior, which comes from psyche, which is defined as soul, mind, or spirit, right, opposed to the body. Logia, which is science or study, so there you go, scientific study of the mind and behavior. A few definitions on abortion. You guys are probably familiar with them. I'm going to read them out. Well, I'm going to read the last one out because I find it unnecessarily confusing, which is a psychological approach that we'll see again and again as we explore the socio-political and cultural impact of abortion. So, an intervention performed within the limits of state and jurisdiction law by a licensed clinician, for instance, a physician, nurse midwife, nurse practitioner, physician assistant, intended to terminate a suspected or known intrauterine pregnancy, and that does not result in a live birth. Does that feel unnecessarily complicated to anyone?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right, are you guys aware of any missing words, any words that you would expect to see in the definition of psychology or the definition of abortion?
Fetus or embryo?
Mm-hmm. Well, in the one from Yale Medicine, they do use fetus and uterus. They don't use embryo.
In what term?
The Planned Parenthood one is funny. It's fun.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Normal.
Abortion, right. Abortion is normal. Abortion is healthcare. What about human?
Yeah.
There's no mention of human. Person, right? Fetus means that which grows. I think it's Greek. Don't quote me on that. Well, what which grows? The human. Which leads me to this definition. The intentional killing of a human being living in the womb. That feels very straight and to the point about what the act of abortion is. All right, Catholic psychology. It's the study of psychology that's grounded in Catholic anthropology. So a Catholic psychologist is a person trained in the psychological sciences, but who is also trained in Catholic philosophy and theology. Right? So we believe that all truths are derived from the source of truth and therefore can't contradict each other. So psychological principles can't contradict theological and philosophical principles, because if science is the pursuit of truth, and psychological science pursues psychological truth, then the truths arrived at through the study of the human psyche must coincide with principles already known to be true through philosophy and theology, which is not something we're always going to see in the secular research. Any questions, reactions thus far? So what role does language play in this discussion? A lot, right? Yeah, the words we choose to use in discussing this topic has a psychological impact, has an emotional impact.
They just don't use the word human in person just to dehumanize the actual action of what it actually does, which is kill a human being. So people just, like normal people that, like agree with it or don't know much about abortion, to say, oh, it's not that bad, or it's not really doing anything because it's not a living person.
Right.
Well, that's what I was going to say, like life. Because the word life is also important. Like, how do you define life?
Yeah,
You know,
and the end of life, right? Even the term termination.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, I can't help but think of Terminator every time I hear it. And it feels out of place. Like it almost feels a bit goofy.
Clinical. It feels
Yeah.
clinical, like
Yeah.
sterile. Right?
Yeah, very sterile, impersonal.
Mhm.
Yeah. So just in that little brief section, is anything coming up for you guys as far as like how philosophy anthropology, worldview impacts or could affect the scientific approach?
Worldview definitely would play a large role in it because it would, in a way, be the first thing to influence where you focus, not only the language you use, but also in terms of like studying the effects of it, like where is your focus? What are the things that you don't pay as much attention to, especially if the worldview influences it to such a degree that you begin to, in a way, neglect the actual scientific process in lieu of making a point via whatever study or it is.
Right, yeah, consciously or unconsciously, right? I like to give people the benefit of the doubt. I think it only helps me if I think that people are trying to do the best they can. We know that we exist in fallen worlds, that's not always the case, but it helps me to think that people are trying to do their best. And so the unconscious bias that plays into scientific research, you're going to see as we look at some of the results of current research and what the literature says. So the APA is the biggest psychological association in America. Pretty much to become a psychologist in America today, you have to go to an institution that is accredited by the American Psychological Association. You see their mission, that's straight from their website at the bottom of the page. It is by far the leading scientific and professional organization representing psychology. It's got 173,000 researchers, educators, clinicians, consultants, also students, psychology students, who are members and supporters. So I just wanted to give you guys a brief overview. From the beginning, the first publication from the APA was in 1969. It was their resolution on abortion, and they declared it a civil right of women to be handled as other medical and surgical procedures in consultation with her physician. So from the beginning, a scientific institution with very little scientific research on abortion declared it to be a civil right of women. In 1980, there was some political pushback at the time. I think this was Reagan. You guys can fact check me on that. But Reagan, as a more conservative, was implementing some procedures, and his worldview that the APA felt was contrary to the pursuit of scientific truth. So they came out in 1980 with this right to research abortion in all areas of fertility regulation. In 1989, there began to be independent research outside of the APA that was contradicting a lot of what they were finding, right? And so then they came out to address erroneous assertions. They pointed out some incongruencies in the research, some methods that they found to be unscientific. But again, it was a rather political, social approach to the scientific research space. 1992, they basically just came out with a social statement preserving a woman's legal right to choose. In 2008, I included this in the references at the end because it's a noteworthy study, if any of you care to go look it up. But basically what they reviewed all the research up to 2008, and they found that women who have a single legal first trimester abortion of an unplanned pregnancy for non-therapeutic reasons, the relative risks of mental health problems are no greater than the risks among women who deliver an unplanned pregnancy. And then just a few years ago, they just reaffirmed their stance as pro-abortion.
Is it harder for like Catholic schools to be accredited in terms of psychology because of their like being against the APA?
Yeah, it is. Thankfully, at least the individuals who were sent to Divine Mercy University to review their accreditation status really encouraged Divine Mercy University to lean into their Catholic identity. So like if you're gonna be a Catholic doctoral clinical psychology school than be a Catholic school, like have that integration, because it does fill a void in the field of psychology where there's a lack of integration between philosophy, theology, and psychology. And the APA does have a group on spiritual practices. So I know I'm painting them in a particular light in regard to abortion. I don't think it's inaccurate. But yeah, it's a good question. I mean, it's a challenge for sure. All right, just these are quotes directly from their website a few days ago. So I just wanted to give you guys this is what the APA, the leading psychological association in America, is putting out informationally, scientifically about abortion. So for those people that you're likely to come in contact with in the world, if they're even taking the time to go look at what the science is saying, this is what the science in America, for people who aren't going to Students for Life website, who aren't going to a religious website, this is what they're going to find. This is what comes up when you search for scientific information on abortion, even Google. All right, so some research challenges. As I've already mentioned, the socio-political climate matters. Control groups. I have not been able to find a study that actually uses a healthy control group for studying abortion, meaning that they're not comparing a group of women who had a wanted pregnancy, carried the child to term, gave birth, right? So what we might call a normative pregnancy experience, to individuals who have elected to have an abortion or carried an unwanted pregnancy to term. So there's a little bit of comparison there. Often what they're doing is they're comparing two groups that had abortions, right? So they're comparing a group that had abortion maybe in different stages of pregnancy. So then it's not terribly surprising that you're not seeing significant differences, right? If there's already depressive symptoms due to abortion experiences, then they're going to come up in both groups, which means you're not going to see a statistically significant difference in the literature. And then, like we've already talked about, inherent preconceptions based on ideology, right? How does the researcher view what abortion actually is, what's happening? That's going to influence the way that they do their research and report on the results. Additionally, research often doesn't have adequate controls for pre-existing mental disorders. So if you think about just we'll just say the average woman who is seeking an abortion, she's often not walking into Planned Parenthood until she's seeking that abortion. We'll get to some risks that lead to an increased likelihood that one will seek an abortion in a minute. But then for the research, it's hard to differentiate between the mental disorders that existed prior to the unwanted pregnancy and to the abortion, because the research isn't controlling for it. And with multiple factors of causation. Let's see if there's anything else I want to share. I think this is noteworthy. In most of the literature, maladjustments, so women who are negatively affected by abortion, they are most specifically documented in case studies developed by post-abortion counselors, by the people actually working with the women post-abortion, not by scientific research that's simply reviewing data. Any questions, reactions thus far? Is this making sense so far? I'm trying not to use too much scientific jargon. I don't know if I'm succeeding. So there is a variability in experience, which means that some women don't don't report, I'll put it that way, they don't report any negative experiences after an abortion. Some report positive experiences after an abortion. Yeah, we already talked about that. The example of finding marital status. Women who aren't married and have an abortion have a tendency to have more negative experiences. Women who are married and have an abortion actually tend to say that their spouse is a supportive factor. Which again, as long as there's philosophical agreement between the spouses about what abortion is, then chances are, I mean, it makes sense to me that then a spouse would be supportive, be there for whatever emotions might come up from the woman who's had the abortion. What other positive reactions do you think that people might report, or that you've heard? Like, you guys have had conversations about this. So, like, what do people say are the upsides?
No financial responsibility for a child. Not held back in my career.
Not held back in my career.
None of the stress that comes with a newborn and raising a child.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, dealing with stress. Anything else you can think of?
Sometimes, like, especially with like pregnancies that are determined to be like terminal, like the baby's gonna die, like they feel like they're helping the baby, like showing mercy to it.
Right. Right.
I've read a lot of stories.
Right. It's kind of a mercy killing.
For also just like when the doctor says that, you know, like if you give birth you're gonna die, so like abortion to save the mother's life over the baby.
Save the mother's life.
Even if the baby actually will live.
Right. Right. But the perception is that the
Yeah.
woman's life
Yeah.
has been saved. Yeah. Certainly a positive.
Sometimes what I hear is that women just, they don't want to bring, and like not only that the pregnancy is unwanted, but that they feel like it's an injustice to bring a child into this world.
Right.
That's like one that I hear a lot.
Right. Which comes from a specific worldview.
Right.
That the
yeah.
world is so tainted
Yeah.
that bringing any new life into it would be a tragedy.
Well, it's
Yeah,
always
or an
been
injustice.
tainted.
Yeah, yeah, but so tainted
Yeah,
that it would
yeah.
be an injustice.
Right.
It's introducing you to that. So these are risk factors, predispositions to unplanned pregnancy and abortion. So these bullet points highlight behaviors, predispositions. People engaging in these are more likely to have unplanned pregnancies and then to seek out an abortion. Are any of them surprising to you?
What does delinquency mean?
Yeah, good question. Usually in psychology, it's referring to negative interactions with authority figures. It doesn't have to be legal, but it could be getting arrested for shoplifting. It's usually not like personal violent crimes, but usually like drinking underage, getting caught by the police doing something that's illegal, or frequent altercations at school, delinquent behavior.
Does the relationship distress, does that mean so unplanned pregnancy and abortion, do I view that as a package, so, or each individual? So in other words, like more relationship distress leads to unplanned pregnancy and abortion, or unplanned pregnancy and abortion separately? I don't know if my question makes any sense.
Are you asking if these are predispositions for both?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. Yes is the quick answer. Yeah.
Because I get it for the abortion part, but I don't quite get it for the unplanned pregnancy part.
The relationship distress.
Yeah.
So what that's stemming from is there's a high correlation between abusive relationships and abortion. So typically where there is physical abuse, there is also sexual abuse.
Gotcha. I wasn't sure how to interpret relationship distress. Okay, gotcha.
Right. Yeah. There's also family relationship distress. So there's a high correlation between family of origin, where maybe dad's not present, or if dad is present, then there's constant fighting between the partners that exist in the home, whether they're spouses or not. It's also, sadly, not uncommon where maybe mom's sexual partner is engaged with an underage woman in the home, which then brings about an unplanned pregnancy and is more likely to lead a person to seek out an abortion. Yeah. Any other risk factors that you guys feel like you've heard of, or maybe you've experienced anecdotally?
Mental health, just in general, like if mom is anxiety or depression or anything like that.
Yeah.
Whether the parents, the mother had an abortion.
Yes. Previous ones, I think. Would be out of this. So these are risk factors that the research has identified. The prior ones, if you can think of it this way, have a tendency to lead women to seek out abortions. These are risk factors that lead to an increased impact post-abortion. So what the research is actually showing is that a history of a prior abortion or an abortion after a first trimester typically means that there's an increased negative impact on the woman and on the woman's mental health after the abortion. So, like you named, pre-existing mental illness. The person who's already struggling with depressive symptoms, low self-worth, doesn't see themselves as good and true and beautiful and a gift to this world. It's also not likely, or it's going to be harder for them to see their child that way. And then it's going to be harder for them to cope with the added stress of a traumatic experience, such as an abortion. So then chances are likely that their depressive symptoms will increase. If they perceive that there was pressure or opposition from other people, that can lead to even more relational distress, because then there's guilt and shame associated with their own actions, as well as anger and blame directed at others that they perceived pressured them into doing something that they may or may not have wanted to do, or at least that they're ambivalent about it. Any questions about any of this? Let's see if I have any notes. All right. So here are some psychological consequences of abortion. Increased substance use. We often see women who have had an abortion use especially marijuana and alcohol. I'll be curious to see, I hope this doesn't happen, but you guys might be aware that studies show that Gen Z is drinking a lot less. And so I'm wondering if we're going to see that alcohol use goes down while other drugs go up. We're seeing a high increase in marijuana use with Gen Z, along with other party drugs, for lack of a better term. Recreational drugs, that's the term. Suicidal behaviors go up a lot after an abortion. Depressive symptoms, anxiety symptoms, traumatic symptoms, and sleep disorders. The trauma symptoms and sleep disorders often go hand in hand. One of the symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder is reoccurring images or nightmares about the traumatic experience. So it's not uncommon for women who have had a negative reaction to abortion to then have reoccurring nightmares about the experience itself, and also even the nightmares about the aborted child, which then makes sense that it would affect their sleep.
When you say suicidal behaviors, does that just mean suicide attempts, or is that something else as well?
It means suicidal attempts. It also means reported death wishes. So I wish I would die, wish I could die. It also means non-suicidal self-injury, so harming oneself physically, without the explicit intention of ending your life, of ending one's life, while also reporting a death wish. And then it also means like a lot of this data is collected from self-report in the clinic. So there's kind of a checklist, like there's a Beck depression inventory checklist, and it just asks a person to report if they are experiencing any suicidal thoughts, and that's going to get thrown into this data as well. So it can be thoughts,
So ideations.
ideations, yeah.
So the APA, in their research, they didn't find an increase of anything in any of these?
They didn't research.
In the 2008 publication that I mentioned, I included in the references, they did identify risk factors for mental health problems after abortion. But they still won't say specifically that there is a large enough number of women who experience these psychological consequences to say that there's a causation factor, right? Because of those predisposing risk factors, they're saying that we don't have enough data to say that it's not the pre-existing mental illness that contributes to these factors, right? That abortion is kind of the moderator factor. It might increase depressive symptoms, but look over here, you have all these women who report none of these psychological consequences. In fact, they're feeling stress relief from their abortion. Now, there is a statistically significant number of women who experience these, which is why you've got Coleman. Coleman does a bunch of research and on the psychological consequences of abortion. That's really good. A lot of qualitative work that I'll look at in just a minute, where she just asks open-ended questions to women, asking them to identify negative and positive experiences instead of just having a checklist of symptoms, which is where the APA gets a lot of their data. Nobody checks that box for depressive symptoms, well, then there's no psychological consequence.
So if there's no like randomized controlled trials comparing women who had abortions versus those who carried them to term.
Wanted pregnancies to term, yeah.
Okay, yeah, so is this a relative, or is this just in general, like women have these psychological consequences, or in the papers, is it compared to like general rates in society that are observed?
Right, so these are coming from women who reported these psychological consequences after an abortion. So like I said, often these psychological consequences of abortion are coming from post-abortion therapeutic relationships with the counselors who are helping women heal from their traumatic experiences, which then receive this feedback.
Okay, but it's not saying, like, is it higher, like are suicidal behaviors for this group higher than generally observed?
Oh, then in the normal population?
It's sort of like a statistical analysis of the rest of the research.
Right. That's a good question. There's an increase in behavior from pre-abortion behavior.
Okay.
So that's the correlation, is that it goes up
Gotcha. Okay.
post-abortion.
So it's within subject's design. Almost.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. Yeah.
When you say increase in behavior, are you talking about severity or like the frequency?
Both. Yeah. All right. These were some meaningful quotes from I thought they were meaningful at least, from the Reardon study, which is 7 years old now. It's kind of brinking on being a little bit old. But there's substantial evidence that abortion contributes to the onset, intensity, and/or duration of mental illness. A substantial number of women attribute their mental health problems, at least in part, to their abortion experiences. And then this is one that I think is particularly meaningful. There's a dose effect, where an exposure to multiple abortions is associated with higher rates of mental health problems, both intensity and frequency.
When I mean frequency, I didn't mean like the frequency of the problem happening to a woman, I mean the frequency of the problem happening to the women, like how often it occurs, not like, just wanted to specify that, but I don't.
How often it occurs in the group of women post-abortion versus how often it occurs to an individual woman who experiences that increase.
Okay.
I just want to make that clear because I thought that might be confusing.
Yeah, thank you. Additional psychological consequences, deep feelings of loss. There's a study, the Zabera study. No, sorry, it was a Coleman study. The Coleman study was the qualitative research I was mentioning. And one of the questions was, what are the most significant negatives, if any, that have come from your decision to abort? And a quarter of them, 23%, responded with, took a life. Which then upon further explanation came down to the deep feelings of loss of a life, or the actual taking of a human. There are declines in the quality of life, again, the self-destructive behaviors, the relational distress. Sexual dysfunction occurs in women at an increase of 122 to 182%. Sexual dysfunction increases. Arguments between partners, arguments about children increase 116% for women, 196% for men. No explanation was given for that discrepancy. I was a little surprised that it came up for men so much higher. It's almost a 200% increase for men, 116% increase for women.
Do you think that would be kind of like because the men are trying to like defend their decision, like no, I was right, or like women are more just trying to like hide it, and men are just like maybe trying to protect their partner too, like no, she was right in that.
Yes.
Like supporting her.
Yeah, it certainly could be. Yeah, I hadn't thought of that aspect, that the argument could be the man defending his decision to potentially coerce an abortion. So they lead to argument.
Are the arguments like so? Did they mention a specific realm that the arguments happen in? So like specific topics that they happen around, or is it just arguments in general?
Children. Arguments about children. Yeah. Yeah.
What does sexual dysfunction mean?
Good question.
How is it dysfunctional?
Physiologically, so these are my words, not the studies. The study didn't specify. It just listed sexual dysfunction. So for psychologists, when we talk about sexual dysfunction, it might not reach the diagnostic criteria of a disorder, but usually it's going to have the traits of the disorder, which could be physiologically, like impaired ability to engage in sexual behavior. Is that specific enough?
So like it's harder to, or something's getting in the way.
Right, yeah. Harder to have sex. Harder to emotionally connect for the desire to have sex. Often for women, it's a drastic decrease in even sexual desire. Right, so like you could think of it as a below average desire for sexual behavior. And then divorce. Risk of divorce increases by 37%. I thought about sharing a case study of a young woman. It's kind of incomplete because sadly I had to leave my work with her because I was under a year-long contract. But yeah, just really briefly, I guess, to give you guys a little bit of a peek inside how this often comes up in at least college campus life is women. I've worked with a couple of men as well, but this particular young woman came in because of academic distress, was having a really hard time concentrating, really couldn't figure out why, was experiencing depressive symptoms, tearfulness, sadness, difficulty concentrating, some suicidal ideation, but no intent or plan, so really just like unwanted thoughts of ending her life. And really couldn't figure out why. Didn't report that anything traumatic had happened in the last 6 months. And so we just began work helping, like I was trying to help decrease those symptoms and get her to engage in pleasurable activities and learn study skills and just help her become the student that she wanted to be and to be able to cope with her emotions and figure out how to regulate them. And then one day she came in and said, I figured it out. I saw my new niece for the first time, and I was reminded of an abortion I had. And she broke down in tears and began describing how she'd intentionally been avoiding, pushing away the memory and the experience, denying that it was impactful or meaningful. So telling herself that this wasn't a traumatic experience, that it wasn't affecting her emotions. And it didn't click until she saw a newborn infant. And then what happened is we moved into processing grief, because the grief that was coming up was not only the guilt and the shame that she began to experience, but also this new relationship with her niece brought up all of the life experiences she was not capable of having with this child. And so then we worked through, and all of these images that would come to mind as she would have experiences with her niece, and the desire that had been on her heart, as she came to terms with the fact that if she had carried that child to pregnancy, she also would have played with a rattle with her baby, like she was playing with a rattle with her niece. As she went to other kids' birthday parties, like the grief would just come back up. So the work we did at that point, processing the grief, and then working to reshape her own sense of self-worth and not let it be defined by a behavior and a choice that she, I think in all fairness, had limited awareness of the effect it was going to happen on her, of the effect it was going to have on her, right? The societal message was this was no big deal. Abortion is healthcare, right? So she approached something in her life, I think, as best as she could with the tools that she had at the time and the knowledge that she had for herself. Felt a little bit of family pressure, but we moved toward reshaping her identity. She wasn't a Christian, so I didn't use it in these terms, but in her worth as a daughter of God. So not as a Christian, it was defining her her value, not decided by her behavior, by her past behavior, but helping her live in a way that was congruent with her values. And that's what a lot of post-abortive work is going to be. It's going to be processing the decisions that were made, the feelings that come up, making sense of those emotions. Why are you experiencing depressive symptoms after an abortion? Why are you anxious about how you'll be perceived by other people? Why are you arguing with your significant other more often? And then helping them make sense of what they value in life. And I think the thing I'd like to highlight is I've never worked with anyone who's struggled either with their own or somebody else's, like somebody that they love maybe had an abortion and it's impacted them, who hasn't come to realize how precious life is and how much they value it without having associated that value pre-birth. Right? So it's all, in my anecdotal experience, it's always led to an increase in the belief of how valuable life is. Questions about any of that? So these are some resources for treatment and healing. Do you guys know about Rachel's Vineyard? Okay, cool. Yeah, and there's local work here as well, so I won't go into Rachel's Vineyard if you guys know it. There's just some books that I recommend as well. I'm happy to share these slides. I'll send them to Wiley and he can pass them on to you. Yeah, choose the Burke. So again, I won't go over all these. You guys know. I think part of what makes Dr. Burke's work so impactful is that it welcomes both men and women into the experience, and they acknowledge the silent and unresolved feelings. But there's so much in today's society that we just don't talk about in regard to the impacts of abortion. And Rachel's video really just opens up the opportunity to talk about it. I don't know if there's, so Mary Shelter, I threw that on there, not because it's local, but because, so I came down from the Arlington Diocese in Northern Virginia 3 years ago. And Mary Shelter existed in my hometown, started in Fredericksburg, Virginia. And it's just, I mean, it just started with some women buying a home that was a bit run down, and people helped fix it up. And then they invited women in who were often fleeing abusive relationships, often pregnant, and often being pressured to have an abortion. And it's grown. I think they have 3 or 4 homes now. I don't know if there's anything like that in the Jacksonville area.
I don't know if we have anything specifically that has that broad of a scope, but I know we have a couple of houses for pregnant women and women who were maybe they're kicked out of their house because they wouldn't have an abortion.
Okay.
There's the St. Gertrude House down in St. Augustine.
Awesome.
And there's one that's right next to St. Joseph's. If you see if you're ever at St. Joe's Historic Church and you see that random house that's right there, that is one of those houses.
Very cool. Yeah. A lot of women, and you guys know this, just they're not aware that there are alternatives. And so they think that they only have an option. Reactions, questions?
Just in Jacksonville, there's a women's health center too, right?
There are a number of women's health centers here. But the diocese has a whole list, I think, of all of the different pregnancy resource centers that we have here, the women's health centers, things like the St. Gertrude House. And I'm blanking on the name of the other one, but
Divine Mercy.
Yeah, Divine Mercy House. Question that's not 100% specific to this, but in your work, especially when dealing with people who aren't Christian or Catholic, have you found it difficult to not try and talk to them about the faith in that way? Because you see something, you see them searching for an answer, and you know where the fullness of the answer is, but you know that you just telling them that answer is not going to be helpful in a way. They have to make that journey to get there on their own. Have you found that difficult at all?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I've had enough practice at this point. It was a lot harder at the beginning of my career. Now I've learned to use lingo that resonates with everybody. So instead of talking about a virtue, I will talk about a value. Right? And we can do pretty much the same work in talking about a value versus a virtue. And even, a bunch of the virtues I think are still fine to talk about. We could talk about the virtue of courage, right? We could talk about the virtue of temperance and prudence. Charity is one that I'll have a tendency to shy away from because I think most people are more inclined to talk about love or kindness. And look, I think St. Augustine had it right. Our hearts are restless until they rest in God, right? And there is a great danger in the field of psychology that we make ourselves God. that we have all the internal resources, that if I just learn to regulate my emotions the right way, if I just learn to think about myself the right way, if I just learn the proper communication skills, if I just work hard enough.
There's that quote in the bed.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, exactly. Because I am enough. But that's not, that's not true. It's a falsehood. So, but yeah, it is hard sometimes to desire to evangelize. It's certainly within me. I have to remind myself of the clinical role that I'm in, and not the personal Catholic role.
How do we, like, when people come up and they're like, oh, well, the APA says this, like, there's nothing proven, like, how do we give them the real statistics and information without sounding like complete conspiracy theories or anything like that?
Sure. Well, the APA does acknowledge that there are women who experience negative psychological effects. I think the big takeaway, thank you for your question, I think the big takeaway is that the field of psychology is saying that right now we don't have the scientific research to say abortion causes mental disorders. They will say that there are correlations between abortion and negative psychological effects, but not for everybody. So it's not like, by taking this medication, you feel this way. By getting an abortion, you feel this way. Because some women don't report those negative effects. So scientifically, they're saying as a blanket statement, there's no causation factor for mental illness specifically. So I think that you could speak to the negative psychological effects. You can speak to the increased sexual dysfunction, the disinterest in relationships, the increased risk of divorce, the depressive symptoms, the anxiety, the traumatic experience, right? The sleep disorders. You certainly speak to all of those.
There's sort of no long-term research done because women might not feel initially, but then years down the line, and they're like, oh, I feel bad about it.
Yeah, very, very, very little. That's a huge gap in the literature. Yeah. If you guys couldn't hear the question, long-term studies. Have there been any long-term studies? And again, I could not find a single study with a control group of women who had a wanted pregnancy, carried the child to term. Right? The normal, ideal pregnancy situation. So there's lots of research to be done. It's also just kind of tricky ethically, right? You can't have random assignments. You can't take a group of pregnant women and be like, well, you guys are going to go get abortions. You guys are going to carry your children to term. And then we're going to see what happens. Right? So you're already pooling from a group of people, like you saw at the beginning of this presentation, where there's likely going to be predisposing factors to mental disorders.
When you say there's not a control group, does that matter because the ones without a control group are measuring the women from before and after, as opposed to measuring against women who had the baby before and after?
So most of the studies, what they're comparing are women who have had abortions at different times. So either early on in pregnancy or later on in pregnancy, or they're comparing abortions to unwanted pregnancies, which is where Planned Parenthood and the APA are getting their talking points about how denying women access to to abortion can actually increase mental health concerns, because they're looking at women who have had an abortion versus women who carried a child to term that didn't want the child, and they're seeing
The stress
emotional
would be much greater.
stress, yeah, and in both camps. Yeah. Was this helpful? Yeah? Okay. I honestly couldn't tell when I was putting it together, so I hope it was.
I don't know how familiar you are with this like aspect specifically, but would you be able to talk a little bit about the idea of, this just reminded me when you were talking about especially the case study and what you were, the work that you had done, like the idea of like kind of parts therapy and almost like neglecting one part, kind of pushing it down, and the fact that it never like truly goes away, and you know, and also like the role that that might play into some of these, especially self-reporting studies,
Yeah.
and influencing where like the information will come from.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. In fact, one of my questions for you all, if you didn't have any questions, was like, how well do we convince ourselves that our behaviors are morally acceptable? Right? And how much of an impact does that play in these psychological effects? How we reshape our consciences, and I say we meaning human beings, right? So in psychology, we think of defense mechanisms as strategies that human beings come up with to help deal with the unpleasantness, the anxiety, the stress of life, right? So denying, repressing a part of ourselves, right? If it's hard for us to look at something that we've done, well, then we can just push it to the side, right? Alternatively, we can come up for a reason for why that behavior was justified. As far as the parts work, before I forget, there's a great book by Dr. Jerry Crete. He's a Catholic psychologist up in, I think he's in Atlanta now, called Litanies of the Heart. And Dr. Crete is an expert in internal family systems, which is where the whole parts movement in psychology has come from. The general idea, for those of you who haven't heard of internal family systems or parts work, is most of us can resonate with having different emotional reactions or having different parts of ourselves, right? There's a part of me that was excited to present to you guys tonight. There was a part of me that was a little terrified, right? A little anxious, a little worried. Would you guys like me? What would you think of the presentation? Was it good enough, right? So there's a part of me that was super excited to get up here. There's another part of me that was like, I hope they don't boot me out of the room. I didn't really. But thank you for your empathy. So I think in regard to this, Wiley, one, I'd be curious to see if there were some good longitudinal studies about what parts resurface as more time goes on, especially with women who maybe initially experience an abortion, have an abortion like at the college age, right? For whatever reason, and then go on to have children. The parts that are most likely to be isolated is the term that internal family system uses, I believe. I don't use exile. Thank you. Exile are the ones that are experienced as most distressing. So it makes sense to me that a woman who has had an abortion and has some sense that a part of her, right, believes that the loss of a child, she participated in the death of a child, she willed the death of a child, would then exile, deny, repress, reject that part in order to cope with the stress, in order to relieve the stress, the anxiety, the guilt, the shame, the self-blame, and therefore exile that part. Did that answer your question?
Yes.
Yeah.
Like with that specific study, like do you think it was mostly like going into it, like she knew it was morally wrong and therefore like avoided it, or was it more of in society and obviously in Planned Parenthood, oh it's normal, it's fine. Like did she go into it thinking that it was totally fine, it wasn't a life in general, was it like kind of both?
I think it's both, right? Like, I'll just speak from my own experience as a fallen human person, but there's been so many times in my life where like, I know what's good for me, right? Like there's a part of me that goes, this is good for you to pursue, Joel, right? Like it's good for you to get up and go to mass in the morning. You can be fine with an hour less of sleep, right? But then there's another part of me that goes, yeah, but bed's real comfy, man. It's warm in here, right? And this isn't like I think it's a sin to not go to a daily mass I'm talking about, right? But like both things are true. Like there's a good, certainly, in going to mass. There's also a good in getting enough sleep. And so paying attention to the different parts of us that want different things. I think as far as your question goes, my guess is that there is a part of every woman, there's a part of every human being, I think, that can't deny the sacredness of life. Because it's so distressing. Like I see it in the field of psychology. It's so distressing when people experience suicidal ideation. I've never had anybody come running and jumping and skipping into my office proclaiming that they're having thoughts of ending their life. In fact, when depressive symptoms actually decrease after a person has experienced suicidal ideation, right? Like I'm telling you this in case you guys have friends who are opening up to you, right? Usually they're quite distressed at the idea of no longer being alive by whatever it means. And if that's going on for a while, and then suddenly they're reporting feeling really good, and there's other behaviors that are involved, like they'll give away their possessions to people, that's a sign that they've made a decision to end their life, right? And the reason we see that the depressive symptoms decrease, meaning they're feeling better, is because they've chosen a part to listen to. The part that's not okay with ending the life is still there, it's just been exiled. So I think most women, there's a part of them, they just, depending on all sorts of factors and life experiences, they may not be very accessible. They may not hear it.
Were there studies done outside of the U.S.? Because like most places around the world don't have like legal abortion, but like you know places like most of them are illegal.
Right.
Or they don't go as far. Yeah.
Yeah, starting with Zabera, the last one on the bottom, that was done in Poland. Yeah, I think the rest of mine were all US or Canada.
Have you heard of like the term of like universal healthcare?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then sometimes I saw in like a textbook that I was reading for economics. There's like 2 countries that had universal, because they have universal healthcare, and why the like standard of living or so was higher, I think. But anyway, it was like universal healthcare. That sounds a little off. It's like, let me do my research and like see. It's like, so I looked and it's like, abortion is legal in their countries and stuff. I was like, is that what they consider, or like include in like universal healthcare? Is that terminology?
Right. The healthcare. Any other questions, reactions? No? It was good being with you all. Thanks for having me,
Thank you again for coming out. I'll definitely get the slides and anything else that you might think of. I figured you'd have the references listed at the end, but if it wasn't like attached to the slides, I was actually going to ask for the references list as well. That way we can send it out too.
Yeah, certainly.
If you guys want to read.
Yeah. I'm 99.9% sure that everybody I listed in the slides is on the reference list, but if I missed one, just let me know.